Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. It's been a few months since I relocated to Tokyo, and let me tell you, bicycles are the way to go around here. You can't just ditch your ride wherever though. Gotta pony up between 100 and 200 yen per day for parking. Free spots are scarce, so most folks secure a monthly space. Cheaper that way, and you've got your own designated area. That's when the trouble started brewing a couple of weeks back. Some moocher staying over in my apartment complex decided my bicycle parking spot was fair game whenever they felt like crashing. Sometimes they'd hog it overnight, forcing me to trek all the way to the train station, cough up 100 yen for temporary parking, then schlep back home lugging my heavy bag. Guaranteed I'd have to rise extra early the next morning to repeat that 20-minute station march. After the second spacejacking incident, I gave the building supervisor a heads up, but they didn't lift a finger. Third time around, there was that fancy red bicycle again, smugly occupying spot 105 mine. I left a polite note in Japanese. Please don't park here. This is my reserved space that I use daily. The response? My note got slapped back onto the spot, scribbled with rude Japanese insults. Not only were they swiping my parking, but mocking me too? Oh, it was on. Probably would have let it go if not for those choice words pushing me over the edge. But with this punk guaranteed to keep pulling the same stunt, I decided to fight fire with fire. Figured I'd upgrade to a robust bike anyway for touring, so I invested in one beast of a chains lock. Next time that Crimson Cycle dared squat in my territory, I chained that sucker down tight. It hasn't budged for a week now. First, an angry note arrived, riddled with threats to call the cops. Be my guest buddy. Then came the pleading apology a few days later, begging me to unlock it after all their failure to break the chain. Lesson learned, I'd say. I'm savoring this sweet victory for a couple more days, then I'll probably liberate the poor thing. But on my terms, ain't nobody disrespecting my parking privileges without facing the consequences. The next one is an entitled people story. I've lived in my cozy little house on Oak Street for over 20 years now. It's nothing too fancy, just a modest 2-bedroom place with a nice big backyard that I've spent ages landscaping and making my own little personal sanctuary. When I first moved here, I absolutely loved the peaceful, friendly vibe of the neighborhood. All my neighbors were cordial, we'd chat occasionally and help each other out if needed, but we mostly kept to ourselves. It was the perfect balance of community and privacy. That harmony got disrupted when a new family moved in next door about 3 years ago. Right from the start, I could tell they were going to be trouble. For one, they have like 5 cars crammed into their driveway and street parking, which is just obnoxious on our little street. They also have a bunch of young kids who are always screaming and yelling day and night. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate kids, but these ones are just unruly. I've seen them trampling through my flower beds and kicking balls into my yard, but whenever I asked their parents to control them more, I'd get brushed off. Anyway, all that was annoying but manageable. The real issue started when I began noticing little things going missing or getting damaged in my yard. A garden gnome here, some ruined flowers there. I didn't think much of it at first, figured maybe some neighborhood kids were goofing around, but then one day I came home to find half my fence smashed and the gate wide open. I was positive the new neighbor's kids did it, but had no solid proof. When I went to talk to their parents, they got all defensive and denied it. Kids will be kids, the dad said with a shrug, refusing to take any responsibility. I was furious, but didn't want to cause a scene, so I just rebuilt the fence and tried to move on. In the following weeks, though, the petty vandalism continued. Plants uprooted, lawn furniture overturned. Each time it happened, I'd go to the neighbors and plead with them to control their children. They'd dismiss me every time, acting like I was making a mountain out of a molehill. It was infuriating, but again, I had no concrete evidence it was their kids. One night I'd had enough of this nonsense. I decided to stay up late and catch those brats red-handed if they dared sneak into my yard again. Sure enough, around midnight I peered out my window and saw a couple of figures creeping through the gate. I flicked on my porch light and they dashed off back to their house. Though I couldn't see clearly in the dark, I just knew it had to be those darn kids. The very next day, I told their parents what I'd witnessed and demanded they keep their hooligans away from my property. The father blew up at me, yelling about me spying on his kids at night and making wild threats. I argued back fiercely, telling him I knew what I'd seen. Things eventually calmed down, but the animosity lingered. I started keeping more vigilant watch over my yard while still trying to remain civil for the sake of neighborhood peace. It was a few months later when the real bombshell hit. I was gardening one morning when a county land surveyor truck pulled up to my house. This official-looking guy in a vest knocks on my door asking if I'm the owner. I say yes, and he proceeds to inform me that my fence, a shed in the back, and a portion of the yard are actually on my neighbor's property according to records. I'm flabbergasted, insisting that can't be right, but he shows me maps and measurements indicating a chunk of my land belongs to them. He says it was probably just an oversight that had gone unnoticed until now. I'm in total disbelief, but the surveyor says there's nothing I can really do since records show the property lines clearly. As he's leaving, I glance over and see my smug jerk of a neighbor watching from his porch. He gives me this mocking wave and a knot forms in my gut. I just know he planned this somehow as revenge for accusing his kids. Still reeling, I decide I need to call my brother, who's a real estate attorney. I explain the crazy situation and he insists we can fight it since I have decades of paperwork, property taxes, insurance, etc. proving ownership. It'll just take some work to sort through it all. He says he'll come help me get started. For the next week, my brother practically moves in as we gather every scrap of documentation about my property history. My neighbor persists in his cocky taunting, at one point even offering to give me a good deal if I just hand over the disputed land. Like hell I will. I finally feel equipped with the evidence I need to shut down his nonsense. With my brother's help, I file a lawsuit against the neighbor demanding the false survey be retracted and my property rights restored. He tries to counter, citing the surveyor's assessment, but the judge is skeptical since I can produce so much past paperwork validating my ownership. It takes several months of stressful hearings and legal wrangling, but in the end, the judge rules fully in my favor. Turns out my sneaky neighbor had actually tampered with the property records downtown to make it appear I was encroaching on his land, but our documentation proved otherwise. In the end, he got charged with fraud along with having to pay fines and damages for all the emotional turmoil he put me through. As the court case played out, his harassing behavior only escalated, perhaps because he knew he was losing control. More vandalism, loud music at ridiculous hours, and just overall hostility. The police started getting involved to curb the harassment. Also, the damage his kids had done gave him a bad reputation with CPS. By the end, I think his family hated him for causing so much trouble. Finally, after over a year navigating this mess, justice was served. My property rights were restored, and that deceitful jerk of a neighbor is left defeated and defamed. His schemes may have temporarily shaken my sense of security in my own home, but I refuse to let him take what was rightfully mine through fraud and intimidation. In the end, patience and persistence paid off as truth prevailed over lies. And something tells me he won't be causing any more trouble for me or anyone else in this neighborhood anytime soon. Looking back, I'm glad I stood my ground and fought back using the legal means available. The system can seem stacked against us regular folks, but sometimes, just sometimes, it still works in the end. The next one is a petty revenge story. I was renting a house with Pool, Australia, in Oz. RA have a reputation for being wankers. Well-deserved TBH. They inspect every 3 months, and even for them, they were picky. It turns out a neighbor told us a relative of the RA owned it. Finally, we bought our own place. The lease was 12 months and said we had to pay a break fee of 6 weeks if the landlord wouldn't agree to waive it. I approached the RA and asked if I gave them 3 months' notice and they rented it, would they forego the 6 weeks as they would not be losing any rent? No, was the instant answer. Okay, I thought, not a lot I can do. A couple of days later, I look out my window and see a big "To Let" sign in the lawn. I'm like, WTF. I went out, pulled the sign up, and dumped it out the front. Called the RA. Yes, you're leaving in 3 months, so I'm entitled to do that. But of course, as they wouldn't play nice, I replied, no, I'm not leaving, we changed our minds. I hadn't given notice, etc. A few days later, an unhappy chap in a truck collected his sign. That's the end of that, I thought, but no. Several days later, I got a mail telling me that there's an open house Saturday. For the non-Australians, when you give notice, they have the right to show tenants round the house whilst you're still living there. I called again. Yes, we're having one, it's in the contract. Yes, but I have 3 months left on my lease and I'm not leaving. So no, there will be no open house until then. 2 days later, I receive a bill for $250 for canceled advertising. This time, my sunny disposition is wearing thin. I mail the office back saying that they are now harassing a tenant with a lawful lease. If they didn't stop, I would be reporting them to every agency I can think of. I get a mail back saying, this invoice has been canceled. Imagine my utter pleasure when on the day that I had originally told them we were leaving, I went into the office and broke my lease. I thought her head might explode. The further kicker, that house was empty, pre-COVID, for a good 3 months after we left. So because they were greedy and wanted my 6 weeks, they lost 6 weeks' rent. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work as a monitor in a company that sells wholesale. We have rotating schedules, so if we have activities outside of work, we have to notify them in advance so they can adjust our schedule. It turns out that this is not the first time that they have told me that I should give more notice. So a week before the next week's schedules were made, I informed my leader about all my activities for the month. He clearly didn't like this, so he told me to send it to him in writing so he could remember and consider it for the schedules. Well, if it had happened like that, I wouldn't be here. I needed to rest on a Sunday because that day I had baking classes, and to come in the morning on Tuesday when I saw the schedules I got angry. As always, she did what she wanted. She gave me my rest on Tuesday, and on Sunday she left me in the afternoon. From 2:30 to 11 p.m., my baking class was from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., so it was literally making me choose between my class and coming to work. I was upset because it wasn't the first time it had happened, and I always ended up trying to convince other classmates to change my schedule or break so I could do my activities. I was tired of always looking for solutions for the things she did wrong, and she also had the impudence to take her rest on Sunday. Here comes my malicious fulfillment. I decided to pretend that I never saw the schedules and missed Sunday. I hate uploading statuses to my WhatsApp, but I decided that this time it was a special situation, so I started uploading statuses from my baking class. When I saw that my leader saw my status, I knew that I had won. When it was 3 in the afternoon, my boss, my leader's superior, asked me why I had been absent. I told her that I had not seen the schedules, and that since I did what the leader asked me to do, which was to notify her in time, and sending him my schedules in writing, I assumed that he had respected it. I knew that I was going to ask my leader, but I also know that she has a reputation as a liar, so I knew that she would try to twist things in her favor. So I sent her a screenshot of the conversation in which I told her in detail about my activities. She thanked me and didn't say anything to me. The next day I found out that she was advised for that, and I got away with it without any repercussions. Then she tried to justify herself to me by saying that my boss had not approved the schedule, but it is evident that is a lie. I know they're not going to pay me that day I was absent, but it was worth it to get her scolded, and let's see if she understands that if they don't respect my schedule, I'm just going to be absent, and I'm not going to try to fix their nonsense anymore. The next one is an entitled People Story. I was told that this story belonged in this subreddit. This story happened a few years ago, so details might be a bit hazy. I was returning home from a trip that I cut short due to a family health emergency. The flight was pleasant, but I was in a bad place mentally. I did what I usually do in situations like that and kept to myself, saying few words. I plugged in my headphones and started to listen to some podcast during the 2-hour flight. Over the sound of the podcast, I heard someone speaking loudly in a pretentious nasal voice talking. I pulled out my earbuds and heard a guy arguing with a flight attendant about how he had asked for something several times but didn't get it. I didn't really care and tried to ignore him, but he kept going, asking the flight attendant for her name and telling her that the airline company must hear about it. I don't remember what he wanted, but it was some kind of drink they didn't have available for some reason. I returned to my podcast and raised the volume. 10 minutes later, by the podcast timer, he was still ranting in his annoyingly pretentious way about professionalism, respect, and giving customers what they want. I switched to some rock music to drown him out and saw the captain coming over to talk to him. He was flailing his arms around like spaghetti. My worry about my hospitalized grandmother gave way to anger, and I started fantasizing about all the different ways I would shut him up. The captain walked away with a frustrated look on his face, and the flight attendant started serving the other passengers and ignoring his attempts to stir up trouble. I think they got him some alternative drink which he never touched. We landed, and I put my earbuds away to get ready to leave. He was first in line by the airplane door, and I was right behind him. The door opened, and an airport security guard was standing there to escort him through the tube. I followed, and by the end of the tube, a higher-ranking guard was waiting for him. He stood blocking the way out, and I saw that other passengers behind me were fed up with this guy who never shut up for more than half of the flight time. He was arguing about how terrible the crew and service was, and how he never had service this bad. He kept saying he needs to leave now because his family was waiting for him, or some similar non-reason. My anger was starting to boil. Should I shove him, bang my pulling bag onto his leg, punch him in the back? Would everybody clap? I had to head straight to the hospital, and everyone behind me had places to go. I've heard many stories about people like him online, across many different channels. Nobody would feel bad for them. But this wasn't only about them, it was also about who I am and what kind of person I want to be. I took a couple of deep breaths to calm down as he was telling the guards how to do their jobs, and with the most aggressive tone I could come up with despite my stress and exhaustion spoke up. "Get the duck out of my way." That F-bomb was enough to stun him since everyone else was following a code of conduct required by their jobs. And for the first time since I noticed him, he had nothing to say. The guards took advantage of his silence and started to move him away, hopefully to some back office where he will be delayed for a few hours. I left the airport and headed home for a quick shower and a change of clothes before going to the hospital. My thoughts kept going back to that entitled guy and how he thought he could be a pretentious and rude guy with people whose jobs require them to be polite. Politeness never works with them, and sometimes meeting someone who thinks they're scum is the wake-up call they deserve. The next one is an entitled parent's story. I'll try to make a long story short. I am an only child, and my current boyfriend and I have been dating for 6 years, starting when I was 19 and he was 20. We met at junior college where we started dating, and after that we went to different UCs, but within an hour of each other. My parents met him early on by joining us at dinner. Everything seemed to go well. Then soon after we went to his parents' house, who live about 2 hours from my parents, so I could meet his family. And after learning this, my mom told me how hurt she was that we didn't come to see them too. I expressed that this weekend was for me to meet his family, but it was clear that she felt almost betrayed. Fast forward, my parents invite me up to our cabin and my boyfriend joins. We take my car because it was already loaded with laundry, etc. After we arrive, my dad pulls me aside and pretty much quietly yells at me how wrong it is that I drove and that we took my car. He's the man, he should be driving, blah blah blah. This started everything going forward on a sour note. The cabin is in Tahoe. It gets cold in the winter, so my boyfriend wore a sweatshirt with his hood up during some of the time at the cabin. My parents to this day cite this as weird and rude as well as a reason they don't like him. As we continue our relationship, it's clear that my parents don't like him, but they can't really give up what I would call good or justifiable reasons. They'll say he's just not a good fit for the family. They don't tell me to stop dating him because they can't. I'm an adult. But they do tell me that I need to keep them and him separate. They don't want to really hear about him, and he's not welcome at their house or cabin. He's never cheated on me, abused me, he has no drug problems, etc. Nothing that a normal parent would cite as a problem. Eventually it became an ultimatum given to me by my parents. They'd tell me that if you continue to date him, eventually it will be either him or us, and you'll have to choose. Among other things, they would tell me that he'd never be an attorney, which is what he wanted to do, and insinuating that he probably wouldn't be much of anything at all. After undergrad, I started working at a financial firm. He graduated from undergrad at UC Berkeley and was accepted to law school across the country. We were always very serious about each other and made the decision to do long distance until he graduated and moved back to K. My boyfriend has since graduated from in law school, moved home, and took the bar last month. He starts work this October and had a contract since last year. They have known about this as well. Now, 6 years into our relationship, I call my parents and tell them that we are going to be moving in together. About 20 minutes later, I get a text from my mom saying that she doesn't want to rain on my parade, but that this path excludes her and my dad from my future. That they love me, but they can't be in my life if I choose to be with my boyfriend. I told them I would never understand. Since then, they have sent me more and more text messages saying stuff like, "We feel like we're losing our daughter, this is heartbreaking," etc. And all at the same time including that this is my choice and my fault. I texted my parents that I thought my boyfriend and I should come over and talk, that texting about this kind of thing is stupid, but not to be patronized or belittled, and if it turned to screaming that we would leave. My parents then replied that they wanted to see me face to face to talk, but that my boyfriend isn't allowed. My boyfriend even called my father the night of the initial "we can't be part of your life" text to try and talk or meet up and see if there was a way to talk through any legitimate concerns. My dad did not answer and responded until a week plus later, only to text him that they haven't really ever liked him, that he wants to work through it with me alone, and it's mine and my boyfriend's fault for not trying to address things earlier. Among other ridiculous reasons to not like my boyfriend were Berkeley isn't a man's college. My dad. One time in college, my professor lost my final exam, and when I found out via my final grades and was frantically calling her to figure out what happened, my parents told my boyfriend, "See, this is why we didn't want her to have a boyfriend in college." They've found ways to blame him for everything. The only thing that ever had any merit was that he wasn't working yet. Well, this was because he was going to school to be a lawyer. Apparently marrying someone who will make a lot of money is a bad thing. My boyfriend is the nicest, most calm and peaceful person ever, and he loves me more than anything. But apparently their pride is more important than being wrong and accepting him. I guess I'm just trying to figure out if this is normal, or if it's as wrong as it feels to my boyfriend and I. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.